Hoa moved my markers without knowing that I was a combat engineer in Vietnam, so I solved it my way. The morning I realized they'd moved my property markers, the snow in my backyard was too perfect. Fresh white crust, except for one neat, surgical line cut through it, running straight to the back corner of my lot. At the end of that line, where my rebar stake had sat for years, the snow was churned up dark with wet soil. Fresh dirt doesn't lie. Not in winter. I was standing there in my old green parka, coffee steaming in my hand, when my wife brought out the envelope. Thick, cream paper, HOA logo screaming importance. I opened it, and there it was in bold. Notice of violation. Encroachment on common area. Daily fines, threats of legal action, and one line that made my jaw clench. It appears the homeowner has moved the original boundary markers. A minute later, I heard the click of heels on icy sidewalk. Brittany Kale, our new compliance chair, appeared at my gate in her spotless beige coat. Clipboard hugged her chest. Tennis shoes already dusted with salt. "Sir," she said loud enough for my neighbor to hear, "we as a community cannot allow people to steal land." I just looked past her, to the disturbed snow, the crooked stake, the two clean gloves that had never held a real shovel. I smiled once, small. "Understood," I said, because what they didn't know was that I'd spent a war measuring ground for a living. And this time, it wasn't going to be their word against mine. Stick around and subscribe, because that little metal stake was about to blow up their whole game, and they had no idea who they'd just picked a fight with. I didn't always dream of spending my 70s arguing about a strip of frozen dirt. When I got back from Vietnam in 70, I promised myself two things. I'd never sleep in the mud again, and if I ever owned land with my name on the deed, I'd know every inch of it better than anyone alive. Combat engineers don't get sentimental, but we do get particular. A half-inch off on a bridge, a bad reading on a grade, somebody doesn't come home. So when my wife Linda and I moved into that subdivision outside Grand Rapids 10 years ago, it felt like the end of a long road. Quiet cul-de-sac, maple trees, little retention pond with ducks in the summer. The HOA brochure went on about order and protecting property values. After 30 years running crews on construction sites and another 10 inspecting commercial builds of the county, order sounded fine to me. We were the older couple on the block. I planted tomatoes along the south fence, kept my lawn straight as a parade field, and waved at kids on bikes. My biggest goal that winter was finally setting a small shed on the back corner of the lot so my tools wouldn't live in cardboard forever. Before I ever poured a pad, I did what I've always done. I pulled out my folder, survey from closing, the stamped plat map, my own notes with pencil lines and measurements. I knew where my corners were. I'd been there when the survey crew set those rebar stakes a decade earlier, watching the way their tape lined up with the curb and that big ash tree. HOAs and I had an understanding. They sent newsletters about pet waste and holiday lights, and I didn't bother them. The old compliance chair, a retired teacher named Harold, used to stop by, talk snowblowers, and remind me when the annual meeting was. No drama, no nasty letters. For a while, it really felt like we'd finally found peace. Then Harold moved to Florida, and Brittany arrived like a cold front. First time I saw her, she was marching down our street with that clipboard, snapping photos of holiday wreaths like she was on patrol. The younger families rolled their eyes, but they mostly complied. She loved that word. Still Linda and I kept our heads down. I filed my shed request the right way, with a sketch, dimensions, and a note that sat 3 feet off the rear property line, just like the covenant said. I even attached a photocopy of the plat with my corner markers circled. Old habits die hard. The board approved it with a generic email. As long as the structure remains within your property boundary and in compliance with setbacks, you're authorized to proceed. That was fine by me. I'd built things with less. For a couple of weeks, life went back to the winter routine. Plow comes by. Snow piles against the curbs. The world goes quiet by 6 p.m. I started staking out with a shed pad. Would go once the ground thawed. Just a few strings and flags. It gave me something to do between shoveling the driveway and refilling Linda's bird feeders. And for a while, it seemed like this would just be another winter. Fireplace, coffee. plans on paper. Until the day Brittany's idea of protecting the community turned into a threat with my name on it, and my integrity stamped in bold letters. The first sign something was off didn't come from the HOA at all. It came from the snow. A couple days after my shed got the green light, we had one of those heavy lake effect dumps. 8 inches overnight, wind packing it into smooth drifts. The kind of snow that erases mistakes. When I stepped off the patio that morning, the yard was a clean white sheet, except for one line. It started near the back of my house, a thin, broken track where somebody had waded through before the freeze really set. The crust around it was still soft, like it hadn't had time to harden. I followed it with my eyes, coffee steaming at my glasses, all the way to the back corner where my rebar stake should have been. There, the snow wasn't smooth at all. It was punched down, kicked aside, showing a smear of dark soil. Not old, frozen solid dirt. Fresh, damp, almost black against the white. Somebody had been digging. I frowned and stepped closer, my boots breaking through the crust. The little orange cap I'd painted on my stake years back was gone. In its place, half buried, was the bare top of a rebar rod, about 16 inches to the left of where it should have been. 16 inches doesn't sound like much, but when you spend a year in a jungle making sure minefields are grid to the inch, 16 inches is the difference between safe and not. I crouched down, knees cracking, and brushed away more snow with my glove. The rod wasn't even driven to the same depth. Sloppy. Whoever moved it didn't bother to match the old imprint in the frost. They just yanked, twisted, shoved it back in. I straightened up and looked around. The line of disturbed snow didn't go past my lot. It came from the sidewalk, cut straight to my corner, then back out again. No dog tracks, no kids' boot prints, just a single pair of smaller, shallow impressions. Dress shoes or fashion boots. Not work boots. I didn't say anything to Linda. Not yet. Instead, I went back inside, wiped my boots off the way she likes, and pulled my old survey folder from the kitchen drawer. Plat map, closing documents, my handwritten measurements. I laid them on the table, like a deck of cards, and stared at that back line. By lunchtime, the mail came. Thick envelope, HOA logo, violation notice. It appears the homeowner has moved the original boundary markers. I actually laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the wording was so careful. It appears, not we observed, not per survey, just appears. That evening, I stepped out again right as the daylight was draining away, the whole street turning that blue-gray color you only get in winter. Across the cul-de-sac, I saw Brittany making her rounds. Clipboard hugged her chest, tennis shoes already dusted with salt. She walked like a mall cop, all purpose and no traction. She paused at the end of my driveway, glanced toward the back of my lot like she could see through houses and trees, then scribbled something dramatic on her form. I watched her for a long second through the steam of my breath. She wanted me to come out swinging, to yell on the sidewalk, so the neighbors could close their curtains and talk about the angry old vet later. Instead, I just raised a hand, almost casual. "Afternoon," I said. She jumped a little, then put on her customer service smile. "Sir, you received our notice?" "I did," I answered, "and I read every word." Her jaw tightened. "Good. We expect full corrective action. We can't allow people to, manipulate boundaries. It's not fair to the community." She stressed that last word like she owned it. I nodded slowly, like I was chewing over a difficult math problem. Inside, I was replaying that line of footprints to my corner and back. Fresh dirt, moved rebar, sloppy depth. "Brittany," I said quietly, "just so I'm clear, you're saying that stake, as it sits right now, is the original correct boundary point?" She pushed her glasses up and gave me that little half smirk. "That's what our inspection shows, yes." "Got it," I said. "Thank you." Her smile flickered, like she'd expected an argument and didn't know what to do without one. She shifted on the ice, heels sliding just enough that she windmilled her arm once before catching herself. She pretended it didn't happen and marched off to the next house, authority restored. I watched her go, the cold biting through my gloves, and something in my chest went very still. Most people would have stomped back inside, fired off an angry email, maybe called a lawyer they couldn't afford. I'd seen enough of that in my career. Folks walking into a fight with no plan and less leverage. Me? I went to the garage, pulled an old tape measure from the pegboard, and started at the front curb. I measured to the storm drain, to the mailbox, to the crack in the sidewalk I knew had been there since the subdivision was poured. Fixed points. Things that don't move when somebody gets creative with a post-hole digger. By the time the porch lights were winking on up and down the street, I had numbers scribbled on a notepad and a quiet certainty growing in my gut. Somebody had moved my line, and they were betting I wouldn't know how to prove it. I tucked the notepad into my folder and slid the whole thing back in the drawer. I still thought then that this might be a one-off mistake or an overzealous inspection. A neighbor with too much time, a new chair trying to show she was tough. I didn't realize yet that the notice in my mailbox was just their opening shot, and that Brittany was about to drag the entire board into backing her play. And when they did, they'd force me to show just how precise an old combat engineer can get. If you've ever dealt with a petty HOA, hit the like button, because this was only their first move, and they had no idea they'd already left their footprints all over the crime scene. Over the next week, the Cold War went from quiet footprints in the snow to a full-blown character assassination campaign. It started with a bulletin board by the mailboxes. We only have 2 cork boards in our subdivision, one for garage sales and lost cats, and one for official communications. Brittany loved that second one, like it was her personal stage. I trudged down there one gray afternoon, scarf up to my ears, to grab the electric bill. Right at eye level, under the HOA letterhead, was a fresh notice titled in big, bold letters, "Community Reminder, Encroachment is Theft." Underneath, in smaller text, but still plenty big to read from 10 feet away, recent inspections have uncovered a homeowner attempting to expand into common area by moving survey markers. This behavior endangers property values and violates our trust as neighbors. No names. They didn't need them. There was only one lot with pink survey flags showing in the snow. As I stood there, the door opened behind me. Mrs. Jenkins from 2 doors down came in, cheeks red from the wind, little dog tucked under her arm like a football. She followed my gaze, read the notice, and her lips tightened. "I just hope they deal with whoever it is," she muttered, not quite looking at me. Some people think rules don't apply to them. I didn't correct her. I just stepped aside so she could reach her mailbox and let the door shut behind me. The wind howled between the townhomes, scattering a flyer that had worked itself loose. On the walk back, I noticed curtains twitching as I passed. The next morning, there were 2 emails waiting in my inbox. The first was the automatic late fee schedule reminder from a management company Brittany loved to quote. The second was from the HOA board address, signed, on behalf of the board, Brittany Kale, Compliance Chair. Dear homeowner, as discussed, failure to correct the encroachment may result in daily fines and possible legal action, including a lien placed on your home. Please be advised that altering property markers may constitute fraud. We encourage you to demonstrate good faith and move your shed plans back within your true property boundary. There was a phrase in there that stuck under my skin like a splinter. Demonstrate good faith. As if the burden was on me to prove I wasn't a cheat, they decided I was. By the end of the week, the social temperature on the cul-de-sac had dropped lower than the wind chill. Parents who usually waved when they loaded kids into minivans suddenly found something fascinating on their phones. A couple I'd helped dig out during last year's blizzard crossed to the other side of the street when they saw me coming. Only one person didn't play along. Old Mr. Alvarez across the way, retired machinist, quieter than me, which is saying something. He gave me a small nod as we both stood at the end of our driveways one morning, watching the plow push another ridge of slush toward our mailboxes. "You get one of those letters?" he asked, voice muffled behind his scarf. "Sure did." He spat into the snow, a dark star on the white. They did something like that to my brother's place in Texas. Thought he wouldn't fight. They were wrong. He looked at me sideways. "You gonna fight?" "I'm going to measure," I said. A few days later came the real show. the monthly HOA meeting at the little rented church hall by the main road. I almost skipped it. Those things are mostly coffee, cookies, and people argue about trash cans. But when I saw boundary encroachment concerns listed as agenda item 3, I zipped my parka and told Linda I'd be late for Jeopardy! The parking lot was a sheet of packed snow and ice, cars lined up in crooked rows. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed over a ring of folding chairs. Brittany sat at the front table, beige coat draped over the back of her chair, HOA name tag pinned dead center on her blouse. Clipboard, of course. Always the clipboard. As I walked in, conversations dipped. A couple of board members glanced my way. Then at Brittany, she straightened, smoothed her papers, and launched into the meeting like she was chairing Congress. When they got to item 3, she cleared her throat dramatically. We've had a serious issue arise regarding common area encroachment. Out of respect for privacy, I won't name the homeowner, but I want to reassure everyone that we're taking strong action. She clicked a remote, and a blurry Google Maps screenshot appeared on the wall via a cheap projector. Somebody had drawn a big red rectangle behind one of the lots. Mine. You can see here, she said, laser pointer circling the back corner like a crime scene, the intended line versus where certain individuals have adjusted things. Our inspection, including visual confirmation of property markers, shows an attempt to gain approximately 18 inches of common property. A murmur went through the room. 18 inches sounded like stolen gold the way she said it. A younger board member, Mark, shifted in his seat. Isn't that a bit? I mean, could be an honest mistake. Brittany gave him a patient teacher smile. If it was Mark, we wouldn't be seeing moved markers, would we? She looked around the room, letting that sink in, eyes finally landing on me. We can't let one person's selfishness set a precedent. We have to protect everyone. That did it. She turned me from a neighbor into an example. I raised my hand. Old habit from safety meetings. Yes, she said, sugar over steel. I'd like the minutes to reflect. I said evenly that you just stated on record that the boundary markers as they sit today are accurate and original, correct? A couple of people shifted, sensing something change in the air. Brittany blinked, then nodded cautiously. That is what our inspection shows, yes. I held her gaze for a beat. Thank you. That's all I needed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The board president, a tired guy named Doug, who mostly looked like he wanted to go home, hurried to move the meeting along. But as they droned on about snow removal contracts and holiday decor, I could feel it. Every whispered comment, every sideways glance, every printed word on that bulletin board was piling up, not just as an insult, but as evidence of how far they were willing to go to protect a lie. They thought they were tightening the noose. Notices, gossip, public shaming. The classic HOA squeeze. What they didn't realize was that every bulletin, every agenda, every smug line about our inspection was getting printed, dated, and slid into a neat manila folder in my kitchen drawer. They were building a narrative. I was building a case. And the more they tried to bury me under reputation and pressure, the deeper they were digging the hole they'd eventually fall into. Because the HOA still hadn't figured it out, I wasn't just some stubborn old man with a shed dream. I was a combat engineer who'd spent a lifetime documenting what the ground really said. And I had a lot more than bruised pride riding on those little metal stakes. The social squeeze was annoying, but I could have lived with cold shoulders. What changed everything was when the HOA put a $sign on their lie. The next letter didn't come in a cream envelope. It came by certified mail, green card slapped on the front like a warning label. The mailman made me sign for it, with fingers gone stiff from the wind. Inside, final notice before escalation. They'd skip right past friendly reminder and second notice. Daily fines of $50 starting in 10 days. A paragraph about continuing bad faith encroachment. And in bold at the bottom, failure to comply may result in a lien being placed on your property and referral to our legal counsel. Linda read it twice, her lips thinning. They're talking about putting a lien on the house. Ray. Over 18 inches of snow and imagination. It's not about the inches, I said quietly. It's about me signing a paper that says I did something I didn't do. 2 days later, there was another show at my back fence. I was in the garage, cleaning a wrench just to keep my hands busy, when I heard the crunch of tires on snow out back. I stepped to the side window. The HOA's pet management company rep, slick parka, leather gloves, was standing with Brittany in the common area, both of them squinting at my corner like they were appraising diamonds. He had a little rolling wheel measurer, the kind you use for measuring parking lots if you don't care about precision. Brittany pointed, lips moving fast. Then he trundled the wheel along the snow, bumping over drifts and frozen footprints. Every time it snagged on a clump of ice, the numbers jerked. I opened the back slider and stepped onto the deck, breath fogging in the air. "You folks need anything?" I called. Brittany plastered on her polite smile. "Just verifying our previous inspection, Mr. Turner. As we've stated, your property line ends here." She stabbed a glove finger at the relocated rebar. The rep cleared his throat. "Yes, we've confirmed it appears to be in the correct vicinity." "Appears again," I said. "And you're using a parking lot wheel in 6 inches of uneven snow." His ears went red above his scarf. "It's sufficient for HOA purposes." "Got it," I replied. "So I can quote both of you as agreeing this is a correct, original marker location?" Brittany's jaw flexed, but she nodded. The rep hesitated, then followed her lead. "Yes, as far as we're concerned, that's the line." "Appreciate the clarity," I said, and went back inside. That night, another email landed. This one from the actual HOA attorney, letterhead and all. "Dear Mr. Turner, this office represents the name redacted Homeowners Association. Our client has documented an encroachment onto common area. Unless you signed an enclosed agreement to relocate your proposed structure and acknowledge the association's boundary determination within 7 days, we have been authorized to pursue all available remedies, including filing a lien and seeking recovery of attorney's fees." I held that sentence between my fingers like a live wire. Acknowledge the association's boundary determination. They weren't just asking me to move my shed. They wanted me to legally bless their fake line. I thought about guys I'd worked with who'd signed things to keep the peace, then spent years digging themselves out. A lien on a fixed-income house can snowball faster than any blizzard. I looked at the clock. 7 days. They were betting I'd panic, cave, and sign. Instead, I walked to the kitchen drawer, slid out my folder, and laid everything out in rows: original stamped survey, closing plat, my notes, printed violation notices, photos I'd already taken of the disturbed snow and fresh dirt. On top of the pile, I placed the attorney's letter like a cherry on a sundae. Linda leaned on the counter, watching me. "What are you going to do?" I lined up the edges of the papers until they were perfectly square. That little tremor started in my finger, then steadied as soon as everything was neat. "I'm done arguing on their battlefield," I said. "They want to make this legal?" I tapped the county seal on my old survey. "Good. We'll make it legal." Because it was in that moment, staring at a threat to put a lien on a roof over my wife's head, that I understood they weren't going to stop. Not with gossip, not with posters, not with fines. If I didn't push back hard and smart, they'd run this play on the next quiet neighbor who couldn't afford to fight. So I stopped thinking like a target and started thinking like the guy who used to lay out minefields. If you're still with me and you've ever had someone try to bully you with money and paperwork, drop a comment. Because from here on out, this stopped being about a shed and started being about teaching an HOA what happens when they threaten the wrong old man's home. That weekend, I shaved off the scruff on my chin, put on a clean flannel, and laid everything out on the dining table like I used to lay out bridge plans in a tent. Survey, plat, violation letters, photos, attorney threat. Linda watched me from the kitchen, arms folded, the clock ticking loud in the quiet house. "You're in that look again," she said. "The one from before you retired." I haven't used this side of my brain in a while. I answered, but if they want to play with lines in the dirt, I owe it to them to do it right. Here's what Brittany and her lawyer didn't know. Before I ever humped a rifle in Vietnam, the Army put a transit and a tape measure in my hands. Combat engineers don't just blow things up. We reground. We make maps where there weren't any. We learned that close enough gets people killed. 50 years after Jungle, that training still sat under my skin. I see angles when most people see scenery. I count steps without thinking. I remember that the corner of my lot lines up at the center of a storm drain 3 houses down because I watched the original survey crew set it. They thought I was some soft target with a sentimental attachment to a shed. They had no idea I'd spent decades after the war inspecting footing depths, checking setback distances, rejecting concrete pours that were half an inch shy of spec. I've made contractors tear out entire walls because the rebar wasn't what the drawing said it should be. So instead of stewing, I got systematic. First, I pulled my old engineer's scale from a box in the basement. The metal's still cold and familiar in my hand. I spread the plat on the table, lined the edge up with the printed north arrow, and rechecked every dimension from the recorded subdivision plan. Lot width, rear depth, offset from the cul-de-sac radius. No mystery. My corner was a math problem with only one correct answer. Then I translated that paper into the snow. Out in the yard, bundled in my green parka wool cap, I started from fixed points no HOA will fudge. The bolt and the curb surveyors had set, the center of the storm drain grate, the expansion joint in the sidewalk that was poured the same week as my foundation. Steel tape from point to point, writing numbers on a little notepad until my fingers ached through my gloves. The wind cut through the subdivision, carrying the faint sound of kids' cartoons from behind closed windows. Nobody came out. It was just me, the cold, and the quiet tick of the tape as it slid across crusted snow. By late afternoon, I had my own independent layout. Distances shot, triangulated from 3 different fixed objects. Each one put my true back corner about 16 inches away from Brittany's blessed rebar. The same 16 inches my gut had called the first day. That was good. But experience had taught me something else. My word and my tape wouldn't mean a thing against an HOA that controlled the newsletter and the email list. So I went one layer deeper. Inside, I sat at the computer and drafted a short, polite email to the board and their attorney. Per your correspondence, please provide me with a signed survey you use to determine that the current marker location reflects the legal boundary. I will be obtaining an independent, licensed survey for comparison. No accusations, no insults, just a veteran asking for their homework. Then I made the call they never saw coming. I dug out an old business card from my files, one of the survey firms I'd crossed paths with back when I was inspecting commercial builds. The name on top had changed, but the phone number hadn't. This is Ray Turnarout in subdivision name. I said when the receptionist picked up, I need a boundary survey on a residential lot, and I need it done by the book. Corners staked, ties to monuments, everything tight enough to stand up in court if it has to. There was a pause and a chuckle. Sir, our work is always by the book. But yeah, we can do that. When the crew chief called back, I told him the part one hadn't put in the email. The HOA has already declared where they think the line is. I said, they put it in writing. I just want to know where it actually is, based on a recorded plat. No coaching from me. He whistled softly. You know they shouldn't be touching those markers themselves, right? Depending on the monument, that can get dicey with the state. I know, I said. I just need someone besides me who knows it. We set a date. I hung up and added license survey scheduled to my notes, along with time and the name of the crew chief. Every contact, every response documented. The way we used to log bridge inspections down to the weather and water level. That night, as Linda dozed in her chair with a blanket over her legs, I flipped through the fat folder I'd built without realizing it. Dated photos with our address in the frame. Screenshot of every HOA email. Printed copies of their bulletin board masterpieces. The minutes from a meeting where Brittany had gone on record swearing the current stakes were original and correct. Somewhere in my chest, that old mission brief calm settled in. Back in '69, that was a feeling that told me we'd done enough recon to move from planning to execution. On the surface, I was still the quiet old guy at the end of the cul-de-sac with a supposed encroachment problem. That's all Brittany saw when she clicked around her spreadsheets and drafted her stern letters. But under the snow, under the paper, another reality had taken shape. I had the original recorded layout, my own field measurements, a neutral surveyor on the calendar, and the HOA's lies preserved in their own words. At that point, I stopped reacting to what they sent me and started designing what I needed them to say next. Because now, I wasn't just a homeowner under threat of a lien. I was a combat engineer again. Only this time, the minefield was made of statutes and surveys, and Brittany was marching straight across it in tennis shoes. And in my head, the next phase was already sketched out. Gather proof, tighten perimeter, then give them just enough rope to walk themselves into the blast radius. The survey crew showed up 3 days later, early enough that the sun was just a cold smear over the rooftops. 2 guys in neon jackets stepped out of the truck, breath puffing in short white bursts, metal tripods clanking as they unloaded. I met them at the curb, folder tucked under my arm but closed. "Morning. I'm Ray. Appreciate you coming out in this weather." The crew chief, a stocky guy named Ben, stamped his boots. "We've worked in worse. You got a copy of the recorded plat for us?" I handed him just a plat and the legal description for my closing packet. "Not my notes, not my theories. This is all you get from me," I said. "I don't want to steer you. Just tell me where the law says my corners are." He gave me a look that said he'd dealt with plenty of cranks. Fair enough. They set up in the street first, siding off subdivision monuments buried in little metal boxes under the snow. I watched from my driveway, coffee warm in my hands. Every time they popped a lid and brushed away ice to reveal a brass disc with a stamped cross, I felt my shoulders loosen fraction. You can move rebar in a backyard. You don't move state monuments without a felony. Once they had their baseline, they rolled a small prism pole across my front yard, then along the side, calling out numbers that meant more to me than they knew. I didn't hover. I just listened. X, Y offsets. They were speaking my old language. When they finally reached the back, Ben stood over Brittany's blessed rebar and frowned. He jabbed his lath into the crusted snow about 1.5 feet away, then checked the screen on his data collector. "Shoot that again," he called his partner. 2 more readings. Same answer. He drove a freshwood stake where his math said my true corner lived, pounded it until it thunked against frozen soil. The sound was clean, solid. I stepped closer. "Well, your recorded corner is here," he said, tapping his new stake. He nudged the HOA's rebar with his boot. "This guy? Someone got creative. It's roughly 17 inches off. And shallow. Not our work." The wind bit my ears, but my chest felt warm. "You comfortable putting that in writing?" He snorted. "That's literally my job. You'll get a stamped drawing, corner tie sheet, photos. If this turns into a fight, we'll testify. Whoever moved that stake is going to have a bad day if the state hears about it." I took out my phone, snapped photos. His lath with survey ribbon, the rebar, the tape he stretched between them. Each picture included the date in the corner and a bit of my siding, so nobody could say it was from somewhere else. Back inside, I slid their work order, business card, and a copy of my check into the folder. Independent survey completed. I wrote at the top of a fresh page with the time and weather. Old habit. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. Next step was locking down the HOA story before they realized the ground had shifted under them. I drafted another calm email to the board and their attorney. Per my prior request, please provide the survey or documentation your representatives relied upon when stating, in writing and at the January meeting, that the current marker location is the original boundary. For clarity, are you confirming that the rebar currently in my rear corner reflects the legal property line? I hit send, then printed the email and added it to the stack. 2 days later, the reply came from the HOA lawyer. Dense paragraphs, but one golden sentence. Our client stands by its prior determination that the existing marker reflects the true boundary between your lot and the common area. Perfect. I printed that 2 underlined stands by and slid it right under a photo of Ben's stake. Meanwhile, I kept my own little reconnaissance going. Every afternoon around 3, I'd shuffle out back like I was checking bird feeders, phone in hand. Click, the misplaced rebar. Click, the surveyor's laugh. Click, the undisturbed snow between them. Timestamp proof that nobody had touched the thing since the survey. From my living room window, I watched the neighborhood rhythms. Brittany's beige coat doing its patrol circuit twice a week, her pausing at my yard, scribbling in her clipboard, curtains parting an inch as neighbors peeked. Sure, the crazy old guy was about to get his shed bulldozed. I wasn't crazy. I was patient. I printed the HOA bulletin about encroachment is theft, highlighted the line about move markers, and stapled it behind the meeting minutes where Brittany had doubled down on the record. On a yellow sticky note, I wrote, "Their story, markers are original, I moved them. Reality, markers moved, I didn't." By then, my folder was thick enough to thud when I set it down. Original plat, my field measurements, independent survey with stamp, photos, emails, threat letters, their own words tying a neat bow around the lie. All that was missing was one final piece, a moment where they put their certainty on display in front of witnesses who didn't live on our street. So instead of avoiding them, I nudged. I replied to the lawyer again. Given the seriousness of your allegation that I committed fraud by moving markers and the potential for a lien on my home, I will be requesting that this matter be placed as a specific agenda item at the next HOA meeting, so it can be discussed in detail. I CC'd the entire board, the management company, and, very quietly, the generic contact email for the state licensing board that oversees surveyors, with no comment, just visibility. Within 24 hours, a new notice went out to the neighborhood. Special meeting, boundary clarification issue. They thought they were closing in for the kill. A public scolding. A forced confession. They didn't see that every step they took toward that meeting was another step deeper into a trap I'd already mapped out, inch by inch. I had the ground truth, the paper trail, and their arrogance in writing. Now I just needed them to march into the room and say, with their own mouths, exactly what I needed the witnesses to hear. If you ever had to keep your head down while you quietly built your proof, hit subscribe. Because the night of that special meeting, the HOA walked straight into their own ambush, and I didn't even have to raise my voice. The week before that special meeting, the subdivision felt like a stage being built for a play only I knew the ending to. Snowbanks had grown into dirty white walls along the cul-de-sac. Cars tucked behind them like props. Porch lights clicked on early, then stayed that way, little yellow circles in the blue winter dusk. Nobody lingered outside. That suited me fine. Less movement means cleaner lines. I already had what I needed to prove the truth. What I didn't have yet was a clean, public moment where the HOA would double down so hard they couldn't quietly slither away later. So I gave them one. 3 days before the meeting, I sent one more email to the board and their lawyer. Short, polite, and very deliberate. Given the upcoming special meeting on the boundary issue, I will be bringing my documentation, including a recent independent survey. I assume the association will likewise be prepared to present the basis for its boundary determination for the benefit of all homeowners in attendance. I CC'd the generic county survey/licensing board address again. No commentary, just a silent witness in the room. That same afternoon, I walked out to my back corner with a roll of bright survey tape. The wood stake Ben had set was still there, orange ribbon rattling in the wind. I tied a second strip higher up, made sure it fluttered where anyone peeking to their blinds could see it. Next to it, I brushed the snow off Brittany's rebar and snapped one more close up. Misplaced steel, undisturbed gap of snow between the two. Then I did something that probably drove her crazy. I moved my little string line for the future shed pad back an extra 2 feet inside my own property. On purpose. From the deck, it looked like I was backing down. The flags and strings no longer hugged her fake line. They sat comfortably well within the true boundary Ben had marked. To a nervous board, it would feel like blood in the water. The old guy was finally caving. That evening, just as the sky went that deep navy that eats sound, I stepped out to take the trash and heard the familiar crunch of cheap tennis shoes on crusted snow. Brittany was out back, beige coat zipped up to her chin, clipboard glowing in the light from her phone. She stopped dead when she saw my reset strings. I pretended not to notice her at first. Just banged the trash, can lid back into place, and let the silence stretch. The wind cut between the houses, carrying the faint hiss of highway traffic in her quick, shallow breathing. Finally she called, "Mr. Turner?" I turned slowly. Evening. She angled her phone's light toward my yard. I see you've adjusted your layout. That's wise. It shows good faith. Her tone had that sugary triumph in it. The kind people get when they think they've won something they didn't understand. Just getting things ready for the meeting, I said. I'd hate to be accused of not listening. Her shoulders loosened just a fraction. If you acknowledge the association's determination publicly, I'm sure we can resolve this without further penalties. People respect neighbors who own their mistakes. There it was. Exactly what I needed, her mindset. She didn't want the truth. She wanted a confession. I let a little white vapor drift out with my next breath. Well, I'll bring everything I've got. You bring everything you've got. We'll let the community hear it all at once. She smiled in the dark, a flash of teeth in the phone glow. We're very prepared, Mr. Turner. She tapped her clipboard with a manicured finger. We have documentation. Photos. Observations. The board is fully briefed. I'm sure you are, I said, and went back inside, leaving her standing there with her victory speech half written in her head. Over the next 2 days, I gave her just enough rope. I didn't argue on the neighborhood Facebook page when someone posted, "Glad the board is finally cracking down on that backlot situation." I simply took a screenshot, clicked the little 3 dots, and saved the thread. When a mass email from the HOA went out reminding everyone about the serious encroachment issue to be addressed at the special meeting, I printed it and highlighted the phrase, "Our confirmed inspection." Every time they repeated their story, they were stepping deeper into a corner that the survey, the photos, and the state regs would later box in. The day of the meeting, the temperature dropped into the teens. Salt dusted the asphalt like gray flour, and our breath came out in thick clouds as people hurried from cars to the church hall, heads down, collars up. I walked in carrying my old leather portfolio, the same one I'd used for decades on job sites when I had to tell a contractor's foundation was wrong. Brittany was already at the front table, hair perfectly smooth despite the static in the air, HOA badge front and center. Beside her sat Doug, the tired president, and Mark, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. As neighbors filed in, I could feel their eyes flick between me and the board, curiosity and tension mixing in the overheated room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone's boots squeaked on melted snow. Brittany shuffled her papers with theatrical precision. When Doug called the meeting to order and read the agenda item, boundary clarification, Lot 17/common area, she straightened her spine and glanced my way like she was about to deliver a closing argument. She thought this was her stage. What she didn't know was that the moment she opened her mouth to explain, in front of a room full of witnesses, exactly how original and correct those markers were, she'd be stepping onto a trap door I'd been building, one sheet of paper and one metal stake at a time. When they marked that night as a time to finally put me in my place, I knew something they didn't. That special meeting was about to become Exhibit A in a story the HOA would spend years trying to live down. Because when they gave me that microphone, they weren't just giving me a chance to defend myself. They were giving me the perfect public stage to set off every mine I quietly planted under their lies. The room was too warm for all the coats people refused to take off. Wet wool and melted snow gave the church hall that damp winter smell. Folding chairs scraped as neighbors settled in, clutching styrofoam cups. Doug cleared his throat. Next item, boundary clarification for Lot 17 and the common area behind it. Every head in the room turned the same direction. First to Brittany at the table, then to me in the second row. Brittany rose like she'd rehearsed in a mirror. Beige coat perfectly draped over the chair. HOA badge shining under fluorescence. Clipboard in hand. She walked to the front, heels ticking on the tile. "As you all know," she began, "we've had a serious situation arise with a homeowner attempting to encroach into our shared common area. After multiple inspections and confirmation of original survey markers, the association has determined the true boundary and issued appropriate violations." She lifted a printout, a blown-up photo of my back corner with her pet rebar circled in red like evidence on a crime show. "This," she said, tapping the circle, "is the original marker. Unfortunately, the homeowner moved their shed layout beyond it, effectively stealing approximately 18 inches of community land." A murmur swelled. I saw Mrs. Jenkins nod, lips pursed. Mark, the younger board member, shifted in his seat, eyes flicking between Brittany and me. She wasn't done. The association, she went on, voice getting that righteous edge, cannot allow one person to violate our trust. We have levied fines and, if necessary, will pursue a lien. We are prepared to defend our position. She let that hang, then added, we stand by our determination that the existing marker reflects the legal boundary. There it was, the exact sentence from the lawyer's email, spoken out loud in a room full of homeowners. Doug cleared his throat. Mr. Turner, you asked to speak? I stood, my knees popping just loud enough for the front row to hear, and walked up with my old leather portfolio under my arm. The room went quiet in the way only a winter room can. No traffic, no crickets, just a faint hum of the lights. I didn't look at Brittany first. I looked at the neighbors. Name's Ray Turner. I said, Lot 17. You've seen me shoveling or yelling at my snowblower. A couple of people snorted despite themselves. I've been accused, I continued, of moving my property markers to steal common ground. Tonight, I just want to put facts on the table. I set the portfolio down, opened it, and the stack of documents made a soft, solid thump. First, I said, holding up a photocopy, this is a recorded plat for our subdivision, stamped by the county when this place was dirt. It shows my lot dimensions and where my corners must be, by law. I handed it to Doug. Second is, I raise another sheet, is a violation letter saying I appear to have moved markers. Third, these are the minutes from last month, where the board, through MS, Kale, stated the current rebar in my back corner is original and correct. I moved down the line, passing copies. My hands were steady. My voice was, too. Now, I said, I'm just an old combat engineer. I spent 69 measuring jungle and making sure bridges were where they were supposed to be. After the war, I inspected buildings for the county. I've lived a life where an inch matters. I nodded toward the back doors. So instead of arguing, I hired a licensed surveyor. Independent. Didn't show him my yard. Didn't tell him my side. Gave him nothing but the recorded plat and my legal description. I held up the fresh survey, the company logo, the stamp, Ben's signature. He located the official subdivision monuments in the street, took his shots, marked my true rear corner. I unfolded a large color print, my snowy backyard, 2 stakes marked with letters. In this photo, A is the wood stake he set at the legal corner. B is the rebar the HOA has been calling original. The distance between A and B, I tapped the dimension on the print. 16.3 inches. The room leaned forward as one. Even from the back, you could see it. 2 pieces of metal, almost 1.5 feet apart, with untouched snow between them. I flipped to the next sheet, a close-up of the disturbed soil from that first day. You can also see here the fresh, unfrozen dirt where someone pulled that rebar and shoved it back in shallow. That's not from 10-year-old construction. That's from December. Brittany crossed her arms. Anyone can take a picture, Mr. Turner. That doesn't prove. It proves enough for the state of Michigan. I cut in, still calm. I lifted another document. This is an email from the same surveyor, explaining, very clearly, that moving a boundary monument set from a recorded plat can violate state law. Tampering with markers is a problem, especially if you then use that move marker to threaten a lien on someone's home. Mark swallowed hard. Doug went a shade paler. And this, I continued, holding up the lawyer's email, is where the HOA's attorney says in writing, our client stands by its prior determination that the existing marker reflects the true boundary, which, as you can see from a licensed surveyor, is simply not true. I let the silence sit. Somewhere in the back, a chair creaked. I'm not here to yell. I said, I'm here to make sure everyone understands what happened. The association accused me of fraud. They put up posters implying encroachment is theft. They threatened a lien, all while relying on a marker that, by the subdivision's own plat, and a stamped survey, is in the wrong place and was disturbed this winter. I turned, finally, to Brittany. Her face was tight, color high in her cheeks. So I have 2 questions, I said, keeping my voice level. 1, who, exactly, authorized anyone to touch that marker? And 2, now that you know it's wrong, do you plan to correct the record with the same enthusiasm you used to shame me? She opened her mouth, closed it, then went for the only thing she had left. Clearly there's been a misunderstanding, she said, forcing a laugh that landed flat. We acted in good faith based on what we observed. If a contractor made an error, that's hardly the board's fault. We don't need to make a big scene. Ben, the surveyor, had slipped quietly into the back of the room halfway through. I'd invited him. No fanfare. Now he raised a hand. For the record, he said, voice carrying, no licensed surveyor moved that rebar, and any contractor who did, at someone's direction, should not have. Every head swung back to the front table. Doug rubbed his temples. Mark stared at his notes, like they might morph into a different meeting. Mr. Alvarez cleared his throat from the second row. I saw HOA folks back there with a wheel in the snow, he said. Looked a lot like they were the ones getting creative. The word hung there, creative. Faces turned toward Brittany. The control she loved so much was gone from her eyes, replaced with a trapped animal flicker. Regardless, she said, voice thinning, the homeowner still extended flags beyond. I slid one last print onto the table. A photo from 2 days earlier. My string line pulled a solid 2 feet inside Ben's legal stake. That's my current layout, I said, well within my boundary. I complied with the setback and then some. The only people out of bounds here are the ones who moved steel in the ground and called me a thief. The room didn't murmur this time. It went dead quiet in a heavy, condemning way that says everyone just realized who the villain actually is. Doug finally spoke, voice hoarse. I think we need to go into executive session. You can do that, I said, gathering my papers slowly. But understand this. Every email, every notice, every statement you made is in this folder. So is the survey. If you want to fix this in-house, you'll start by rescinding every fine, pulling down every accusatory notice, and issuing a written correction you mailed to every address you scare with that encroachment is theft poster. I paused. Otherwise, I'll let the county and the state decide what to call moving a boundary marker and threatening an old man's home over it. I looked around the room one more time. Neighbors I'd shoveled out in past winters wouldn't quite meet my eye, but their faces had changed. Embarrassment replacing suspicion. Mrs. Jenkins clutched her dog a little tighter, cheeks flushed. Up to you, I finished. But we all know what the ground really says now. And ground doesn't lie. As I walked back to my seat, the board huddled, whispering, papers rustling with panic urgency. Brittany stared down at her pristine clipboard, like it might tell her how to rewind the last 20 minutes. Exposing them in that overheated church hall was satisfying. But watching the realization dawn on them, that their bluff had just been called in front of the whole neighborhood, with the law on my side, that was only the first detonation, because humiliating them publicly was one thing. What came next would hit them where HOAs feel it most, their wallet, their authority, and the tight little grip they thought they had on everyone else's property lines. If you've ever wanted to see what happens after the mic drop, when the bullies have to pay the bill for their own lies, tell me in the comments, because the fallout from that night was colder than any Michigan winter, and it spread a lot further than my back fence. When I got home that night, Linda didn't ask, how'd it go? She just pointed at my folder and said, well, they stepped on their own rake. I told her, hanging my parka. Now we see if they want to fall quietly or drag this out. The answer landed the next afternoon. First came the email from the HOA attorney, timestamped 7:12 a.m., which told me someone hadn't slept well. Mr. Turner, in light of new information presented at last night's meeting, the association will be rescinding all violation notices and fines related to the alleged encroachment on the rear boundary of your lot. Any reference to this matter in public notices will be withdrawn. The board appreciates your cooperation as we work to ensure accuracy going forward. No apology, just new information. like the markers had quietly moved themselves back. 2 hours later, a second email from Doug, the exhausted president, hit the inbox of every homeowner. Dear neighbors, at last night's special meeting, questions were raised about the accuracy of a boundary marker behind Lot 17. After consulting an independent licensed surveyor, the board has determined that the marker in question was not in its original location. As such, prior communications regarding encroachment were based on incorrect information and are hereby withdrawn. I read that line twice, not in its original location. The phrase they refused to consider when it was just coming from the old guy at the end of the street. They attached a one-page clarification. No dramatic headings this time. No encroachment is theft. Just a dry paragraph about procedural review and updating internal policies regarding property markers. Then the letter came. Thick cream paper again, same HOA logo, but a very different tone. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Turner, on behalf of the board, we regret any distress caused by our recent enforcement actions related to your rear property boundary. All associated fines have been canceled and removed from your account. We are also reimbursing you for the cost of the independent survey upon presentation of your receipt. There was money on the table. Brittany's crusade had just cost them enough that they'd rather write a check than see my folder again in front of a judge. They ended with, "We value your presence in our community." That one made Linda snort into her tea. A couple days later, the physical fallout started. I was sipping coffee at the front window when I saw two board members, not Brittany, trudging through the snow behind my fence with a post hole digger and a level. They stopped at the misplaced rebar, yanked it out with a grunt, and handed it to the management company rep like it was radioactive. Then, carefully, checking a small printout every few seconds, they set a new piece of steel exactly where Ben's stake had been. Deeper this time. Solid. One of them poured a little concrete around the base before kicking snow back over it. They didn't wave. I didn't go out. I just took a couple of quiet photos from the deck, more out of habit than anything. Proof that, for once, the HOA had actually put something back where the law said it belonged. The next regular meeting, Brittany's beige coat was still on the back of her chair, but the badge on her chest had changed. Member at large. No more compliance chair. Doug announced, in the driest voice I've ever heard, that Brittany has chosen to step back from enforcement duties while we review our procedures. Chose. Right. Mark, the younger guy, suddenly had a new title, Interim Compliance Liaison. He cleared his throat, looked straight at me, and said, all future boundary disputes will require an independent license survey before any violation is issued. That was the real win, not their canceled fines, not their check reimbursing my survey to the penny. It was a new rule. They couldn't play pretend with tape wheels in the snow anymore. If they wanted to accuse someone of stealing land, they had to bring an adult to the playground. The social weather shifted. 2. Mrs. Jenkins caught me at the mailboxes a week later, cheeks pink against the wind. Her little dog squirmed in her arms. I saw the email, she said, about the marker. I'm sorry I assumed. I shrugged. Markers move. Ground remembers. She smiled embarrassed and then added, if you need anyone to vote for you, if you ever run for the board, let me know. I had no intention of running for anything. But the fact that she offered told me what I needed to know. The story had flipped. I wasn't the stubborn old man with a tape measure anymore. I was a guy who'd stood up calmly and made the board blink. Fines gone. Lien threat dead. My shed layout approved a second time, this round with a little extra politeness in the wording. Boundary reset where it always should have been. And HOA suddenly very aware that those little bits of steel under the snow weren't toys. From that point on, every notice they sent out came with more footnotes than a college essay. Per city code. Per recorded plat. Brittany still clicked around with her clipboard, but now she kept a wider berth for my yard. I'd won without yelling, without slamming a single door. Just tape, paper, patience, and a lifetime of knowing that inches and records matter. And the HOA, they'd learned the hard way that when you threaten a combat engineer's home over a line in the dirt, you don't just get a cranky email. You get your own rule book turned into a minefield. If you're still here and you like seeing bullies lose with paperwork instead of fists, hit the like button. Because what happened to that HOA after the dust settled changed more than my back fence. Spring came late that year, the way it always does in Michigan. One day the snowbank at the end of our drive was taller than Linda. The next it was a gray, shrinking lump with cigarette butts melting out of it. The cul-de-sac finally showed its concrete bones again. By then, the shed pad was poured. I'd waited until the dust from the boundary clarification settled and the ground softened. I formed it myself like I'd done 100 times on job sites, double-checking the setback from my now proper corner, just because that's who I am. When the inspector came, he barely glanced at the tape before signing off. "Looks textbook," he said. "Wish half the contractors I see cared this much." Out back, that new rebar stake, the one set where the law said belonged, sat hidden in the grass like a healed scar. No drama. No orange flag, just steel exactly where it ought to be. Every time I mowed, the blade hummed right past it, without a nick. The ground and the record were finally saying the same thing. The neighborhood thawed too. Kids reappeared with chalk and scooters. Mr. Alvarez started taking his slow walks again, nodding at me from across the street. Even the people who'd crossed the other side all winter began to drift back into a normal, "Hey, Ray," as if the posters and the whispers had never happened. On the first warm Saturday, I was in the driveway reorganizing tools in my new shed when Mark wandered up, hands in his pockets. He looked younger without fluorescent lights on his face. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." He stared at the gravel a second. "We're rewriting the enforcement section of the bylaws," he said. "Independent surveys for boundary stuff, documentation, all that. Doug wants you to look it over before we vote." He gave a half smile. "You've seen more of this kind of thing than we have." I wiped my hands on my jeans and flipped through the draft on the tailgate. Clearer timelines. Requirement for outside professionals before fines. A clause about board members not touching any kind of survey monument, ever. "It's a start," I said. I pointed at one sentence. "Change made to shall here. If you leave them wiggle room, someday someone like Brittany will take it." He nodded, scribbling. "You ever think about running for board?" I shook my head. "I've had enough meetings for 3 lifetimes. You don't need me in a chair. You just need the ground truth written down where no one can pretend they didn't see it." A car door slammed up the street. Brittany emerged from her townhouse in yoga pants and sunglasses, no badge, no clipboard. She glanced our way, then fixed her eyes on her phone, and walked to her SUV like the pavement might open up if she looked at me. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just watched her slide behind the wheel and drive off a little faster than she needed to. Linda came out with 2 iced teas, handed me one, and leaned against the truck. "You know," she said, looking at the shed, the yard, the kids drawing hopscotch on the sidewalk. "For a battle over 16 inches, it changed an awful lot." "It was never about the inches," I said. "It was about someone thinking a piece of paper with a logo on it meant more than the facts in the dirt." She bumped my shoulder. "You showed them." "Maybe," I answered. "Or maybe the surveyor did. Or the state regs. I just lined things up so the truth had nowhere to run." That's what stuck with me after the fines were gone and the market was fixed. Not that I'd won, but how close it had come to going the other way. If I hadn't kept every letter, taken every photo, known what those little brass discs under the snow meant. One overeager chair with a clipboard could have stamped me a thief and leaned on my house until I broke. That's why, when folks at the mailboxes grumble now about some new notice or petty rule, I tell them the same thing. You don't beat people like that by shouting. You beat them by knowing the rules better than they do and writing everything down. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's currently appearing on your screen.